Forget everything you think you know about medieval chastity. The Middle Ages were not an age of repression. They were an age of exposure when love, desire, and even physical performance were treated as matters of public record, a time when marriage was not sealed with a kiss but with witnesses. When doctors could prescribe pleasure as medicine, and bishops built fortunes from the very sins they condemned. In this strange and haunting world, privacy, the quiet right to love in secret, simply did not exist. Every intimate act had meaning beyond the bedroom. It could determine inheritance, legitimacy, even peace between nations. The court could summon you to prove your body's capability, the church could tax your desires, and your community could turn your shame into a festival of punishment. Why did society make the most private part of human life into a public institution? What logic, what fear, what hunger for control stood behind it all? To answer that, we must descend into the machinery of medieval intimacy, a world built on contracts, witnesses, theology, and profit. A world where the body itself was evidence. Now, let us enter the first chapter of this hidden order, the invisible constitution of intimacy. In medieval Europe, intimacy was not a personal matter. It was a contract written in flesh and sealed before witnesses. Marriage was not built on love, but on law, an alliance of property, inheritance, and bloodlines. The body became the courtroom, and desire, a legal duty. Picture the year 1370 inches, York, England. A man named John Sanderson stands before a panel of judges, physicians, and scribes. His wife has accused him of failing to perform his marital duty. The court orders a medical inspection. In a cold chamber of stone, he is examined by certified experts. Their observations are written down in careful Latin, every detail of his condition recorded for public judgment. This was not a scandal. It was procedure. Across Europe, similar fitness trials were held to determine whether a man or woman was capable of consummation. Failure meant annulment. It meant the collapse of alliances, the loss of dowries, the ruin of families. In Paris, 1450, Pierre d'Effrenville faced the same ordeal. He succeeded only after swallowing dangerous herbal mixtures that nearly poisoned him. Men risked their health, even their lives, to avoid the shame of failure. For them, the body was no longer their own. It belonged to law, to family, and to the church. But what happened after these tests was even stranger. In royal marriages, consummation had to be witnessed. In 1445, when the 15-year-old Margaret of Anjou married King Henry VI, 23 witnesses were present in the royal bedchamber. Curtains were drawn thin enough to reveal silhouettes. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood at the foot of the bed to bless the act. Only when the crowd heard the proper sounds could the political union between England and France be declared valid. These public nights were not simply humiliation. They were evidence proof that two dynasties had truly become one. Without witnesses, treaties might collapse. Wars could begin. The same ritual repeated across Europe. In Florence and Paris, witnesses waited behind curtains. In London, sheets were displayed at dawn as proof of completion. In Rome, even the midwives swore legal oaths about what they saw. Every breath, every movement became a matter of record. To modern minds, this seems barbaric. Yet, to the medieval world, it was rational. In a society without genetic testing or written civil law, the act of consummation was the signature that sealed legitimacy. It guaranteed heirs, ensured the flow of property, and confirmed divine order. What they called virtue was, in truth, a system of documentation. Every witness, every sheet, every recorded oath was part of an early bureaucracy of the body, a network of proof that held kingdoms together. And so, under candlelight and prayer, the private became public, the bed became a courtroom, and the lovers became evidence. Now, let us step deeper into the paradox to the world where the church, while preaching chastity, built its wealth from desire itself. In the medieval world, morality had an accountant. Behind sermons on purity stood ledgers, taxes, and receipts. The church, the very institution that thundered against lust, quietly turned desire into an industry. To understand how, we must enter the city of London. Along the south bank of the Thames, a district called Southwark, ruled not by the crown, but by the Bishop of Winchester. Here stood the bishop's Winchester geese, a network of licensed establishments that operated under his authority. Over 1,000 women worked in these houses. Their doors bore the bishop's coat of arms. Their earnings filled the cathedral's treasury. The taxes from every act of pleasure paid for every hymn that echoed under the vaulted ceilings of Winchester Cathedral. These were not hidden dens of sin, they were regulated businesses. Women carried work permits sealed by the church. Physicians, also employed by the bishop, performed health checks. Weekly taxes, called sin fees, flowed directly to the ecclesiastical office. Those who wished to continue during Lent paid extra fines. Even retirement plans existed, early insurance for women who would rarely live to use them. The Bishop of Winchester was not alone. Across Europe, other prelates followed the same model. In Avignon during the papal exile, the Vatican itself ran an entertainment quarter. In Germany, the Archbishop of Mainz managed similar networks in 6 cities. In Spain, the district of Seville connected to its cathedral through secret tunnels so priests could visit discreetly. The walls of faith were built with a gold of vice. When reformers tried to ban the practice, they failed. At the Council of Constance in 1414 and the Council of Basel in 1431, clerics condemned the trade. Yet the very halls that hosted these debates stood above operating brothels owned by bishops. The hypocrisy was structural, not accidental. To justify it, theologians reached for the logic of St. Augustine, who wrote that vice was a necessary sewer fowl, but vital to keep the city clean. Thomas Aquinas expanded the idea. Better to regulate lust than to let it turn into violence or rape. Under this reasoning, brothels became moral institutions. They protected the peace, but beneath the philosophy lay something simpler: money. Building cathedrals was expensive. Financing wars required endless gold. Bishops lived like nobles, and every confession, every indulgence, every taxed pleasure kept their world afloat. Historians estimate that up to 30% of church income in major cities came from these operations. What began as moral supervision evolved into economic governance. By controlling who could work, where, and at what price, the church created a marketplace of morality. Dress codes marked which women were licensed. Church guards patrolled the streets for safety and for unpaid debts. The institution that preached against sin now owned its infrastructure. This was not hidden hypocrisy, it was policy. The moral order of Europe was sustained by the prophets of temptation. The confessor and the tax collector worked side by side. And so the paradox deepened. The same bishop who warned his flock to resist desire spent his evenings reviewing earnings from the houses of sin. Chastity and commerce had become 2 sides of the same coin minted in the treasury of the sacred. From this world of theological bookkeeping, we moved to another frontier where medicine, faith, and survival merged into something even more intimate. If the church managed lust as business, medicine treated it as biology. In the medieval mind, the human body was a vessel of humors, hot and cold, wet and dry, and balance, determined health, fertility, and even morality. Doctors, midwives, and theologians agreed on one thing: a woman could not conceive unless she reached pleasure. This belief, called the two-seed theory, came from the ancient physician Galen. He taught that both men and women produced generative fluids and that conception required both to be released. From this idea grew an unexpected responsibility. Husbands were told that satisfying their wives was not only kind, but mandatory. A woman who did not climax might fail to conceive, and that failure was considered a sin. In the universities of Salerno and Paris, professors taught anatomy mixed with theology. Medical texts like the Times, Trotula Times, described in delicate detail how to awaken female desire, sweet-smelling oils, rhythmic touch, gentle warmth. Some doctors recommended music or dance to stir the spirits. Midwives became teachers of rhythm and technique, guiding couples toward successful conception. For a brief moment in history, pleasure was not indulgence, it was duty. But outside these privileged halls, desperation ruled. Medieval life offered little mercy to women. Pregnancy after pregnancy broke their bodies. Childbirth was the leading cause of death. And still, the church forbade any attempt to prevent it. So women turned to medicine or what passed for it to reclaim a measure of control. They drank teas of pennyroyal and rue, unaware that both could destroy the liver. They swallowed lead compounds called sweet salts, which poisoned the brain. They used copper sulfate as post-intercourse cleansing, burning the flesh it touched. Others followed older recipes, inserting mixtures of honey, vinegar, and animal dung as crude barriers. The results were often fatal. The rich could afford more refined experiments. They soaked sea sponges in lemon juice or wine, They stitched fine membranes from sheep intestines, early ancestors of the condom, and tied them with silk ribbons. But these too were condemned as armor against God's will. To interfere with conception was to challenge divine order. In secret, women shared remedies through a shadow network of midwives and healers. Knowledge moved from convent to village, wrapped in the language of medicine but born from rebellion. To warm the womb, or cool the seed, became code for survival. Yet the same skills that preserved life could end it. Many midwives were later branded witches, accused of knowing too much about how to stop a child from being born. Still, others went further, into the realm of love magic. They mixed potions of menstrual blood, powdered bone, and the hearts of animals, believing they could bind affection or bend fate. These acts were desperate attempts to seize power in a world where women owned neither property nor choice. A love spell was not madness, it was economics. The medieval science of desire was built on error, but it produced strange truths. It granted women a kind of authority no later century would permit. In an age when the church preached submission, medicine told men to learn tenderness. And though the tools were crude and the theory false, the outcome was radical, the recognition that female satisfaction mattered. Yet even that fragile progress carried a cost. For every herbal cure, there was a grave. For every new remedy, a trial for witchcraft. And in this dance between pleasure and punishment, we see the pattern of a civilization trying to master its own instincts. Now, as the story nears its end, we step out of the chamber and into the public square, where shame itself became spectacle, and punishment turned into entertainment. By the late medieval era, Europe had perfected the art of making intimacy visible. Courtrooms examined the body as evidence. Priests taxed the sins they condemned. Doctors prescribed pleasure as medicine. And crowds filled the streets to witness public punishments for adultery. Every kiss, every birth, every failure was recorded, judged, and displayed. In cities like Carcassonne and Toulouse, adulterers were paraded naked through town, tied together by ropes while children watched and bells rang. The humiliation was not spontaneous, it was ritual. It told the community that desire must serve order, that private sin demanded public cleansing. The same crowd that prayed in the morning laughed and jeered by afternoon. And yet, beneath this cruelty, another transformation was beginning. As Europe moved toward the Renaissance, new ideas of selfhood and individuality emerged. The home began to close its doors. The bedchamber ceased to be a courtroom. The body, once public evidence, became private territory. Medicine moved behind walls. Confession replaced exposure. Privacy, that fragile word we now take for granted, was not a natural right. It was a discovery, a slow revolution born from exhaustion with centuries of spectacle and shame. But even now, the echoes remain. The surveillance has changed its form. Where bishops once kept ledgers of sin, algorithms now collect our desires. The modern world no longer forces witnesses into the wedding chamber, yet we volunteer them through screens and feeds. What was once judged in the square now unfolds online, one post at a time. The medieval world shows us that humanity has always tried to regulate what it fears most, its own longing. They built courts, rituals, and punishments to contain it. We build laws, data systems, and social norms. The tools have changed, but the impulse has not. So, when you close the door tonight and enjoy the quiet miracle of privacy, remember what it cost to earn it. Remember the generations who lived without it, whose bodies were property, whose love was proof, whose shame was public. For them, intimacy was law. For us, it is freedom. And that freedom remains as rare and as precious as any treasure history has ever produced.